This is where the fun begins.
The fate of the galaxy is now in your hands. With the new LEGO Star Wars Slave One, you can load Captain Solo, arm your weapon systems, man the cockpit, and take off with the most feared ship in the galaxy. But watch out for rebel ships. No matter the enemy, no matter the firepower, you control the action. With the new LEGO Star Wars collection.
Hello, hello, and welcome everyone for Talking EU. It's been a while since I've had someone in the hot seat here, and I'm so honored and privileged to have EU Commando, who I have, communicated with on Twitter a lot, and he is very knowledgeable. I'm gonna put my face back on the camera here. Let me see here. So I'm so excited to give you guys a glimpse of Star Wars through his eyes, and that's what Talking EU is about: is going in, interviewing people about how they got started in Star Wars, and particularly how they got into the EU and what makes them tick with their love of the EU. So how are you doing, EU Commando?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me out.
Yeah, thank you for coming in and accepting this interview. And I'm excited to learn more about what got you into the EU, Star Wars EU, and, your passion about that and everything else. And so we have people trickling in now, and so thank you guys for coming in. Orange Hat Review just popped on in. Hello, hello, hello. And he is a channel member as well. And I did post his link here. So if you guys don't know anything about what he does, go ahead and describe what your channel is about.
So it's actually a video game channel more so than a Star Wars channel. I review everything. Started probably about 2016 with a Doom review. My focus is kind of on retro and indie games. I play a lot of retro shooters and platformers. And then my co-host has started doing TV show reviews. He's done 2 so far, one for the Obi-Wan show and one for the Halo show. So it's mainly video game reviews, but we're starting to kind of dabble in TV show reviews as well.
Nice. Thank you. So if you guys are interested in all the gaming stuff, and just go check out his channel, and subscribe, share support here. This is what this is about as well, is supporting everybody in the bigger EU community as well. So then we have Dermot McQuaid here. Hello there. And then we have Matt Wilkins. Boxer briefs are commando.
I'm a big fan, Matt, by the way. So thanks for tuning in.
Yeah, and I did have a Talking EU interview with Matt. So those who want to watch that after this are curious, you can find it in the on my channel. Just click on the link and listen to it later on. So what is that? Boxer briefs or commando? Hey.
I'm a boxers guy.
Nice. Yeah, he comes in with the craziest stuff sometimes, and it's so amusing and fun. So yeah,
I love his channel.
Yeah, and that's one thing. I don't know about you, but when the buyout occurred and then we got the news about the EU being just like axed because they wanted a cleaner slate, his channel helped me like kind of recover from that in a sense, because I felt so disenfranchised.
Yeah.
I think a lot of us did. And so I got in, because I have my YouTube channel was all about my native, my cultural dancing and stuff. But I would go and watch his stuff. And then from what happened with seeing how they took Luke's arc and stuff with The Last Jedi, I then decided I'm going to start sharing videos about pre-Disney lore and talk about that and all of that and keep that in front of people. So he was one of my inspirations. So thank you, Matt, so much. So, yeah. And then we have Phil TMT in here. How are you doing? And then also Jacob. So, all right. So what got you into, what movie got you into Star Wars? Usually it's a movie. Sometimes it's not. So what movie really got you into Star Wars?
So I started watching Star Wars as young as I can remember. My grandparents actually had the original trilogy theatrical cuts on VHS. So that's where I started with, the original Star Wars, Empire, and Jedi,
Mm-hmm.
um, and watched them all the time as I was a kid. Eventually got original trilogy toys. I
Mm-hmm.
think there was a year I was probably like 5, maybe, because I was born in
Mm-hmm.
'94, so this was way after the
Okay.
movies had been out for a while.
Okay.
There was a
Okay.
Halloween where I think I was Darth Vader and my brother was Yoda,
Mhm.
something like that. So I mean, we were like really young. And then,
Yeah.
of course, growing up with the prequel trilogy as those came out, I saw Phantom Menace in theaters. That was the first Star Wars I had seen in theaters. And then, so I'd always kind of been a fan, and then it really blew up from kind of a fan to an obsession
Mm-hmm.
when the original Star Wars Battlefront games came out,
Ah.
and then the Revenge of the Sith is kind of where everything just kind of exploded from there.
Yeah. All right. So you kind of answered one of my questions, but we'll go back to that one. So which was your favorite movie out of the OT then?
So it's basic, but Empire is my favorite. Growing
Okay.
up, I always loved Hoth.
Okay.
The battle with the walkers. I was obsessed with the walker designs. I'm a
Mhm.
big mecha fan with anime. Like my favorite anime is Robotech and Macross.
Okay.
So I've always kind of been really into mech designs and
Mhm.
loved the AT-AT walkers. It was something that has stuck out with me forever. But then that whole movie is just fantastic from beginning to end.
Okay. What is your favorite moment in that movie then?
So obviously the Hoth battle is probably the most like memorable, I would say, but my
Mhm.
favorite is the duel between Luke and Vader at the end. It's
Okay.
actually my favorite lightsaber duel in all of the movies,
Yeah.
just because of the raw emotion behind it and the reveal of Vader being Luke's father, and it was exciting and kind of fast paced, but at the same time it wasn't like overly flashy, which I really liked.
Uh-huh.
But yeah, that moment just is great too.
So you would say that that movie was the best subversion of expectations ever in movie history then, considering what RJ was saying about his movie, The Last Jedi.
Oh, absolutely.
I always have to throw that out there when I talk to people who talk about The Empire Strikes Back, because that was a pivotal moment of like how well a subversion was when it comes to changing things up and surprising the viewers with the direction they go with that. And Darth Vader, was phenomenally. That was the best reveal ever in, I believe,
Hmm.
in movie history.
Absolutely.
It set everything up so perfectly and opened up Return of the Jedi to their conflict of the redemption versus trying to turn Luke and stuff like that. Just a wonderful storyline there as well. So let's see here.
And
Um,
honestly, it was one of the first memes too. I
mhm.
mean, the "I'm your father" line has been
Yeah,
recited and parodied in so many different things.
yeah. Yep, exactly. And memes are not really bad. If people try to use that to kind of mock things, but they're not bad at all. It's just, sometimes it shows a sense of humor and respect for that as well. And
Hmm.
but I guess it depends on the person who uses it, because I've seen memes used to try to mock the EU and stuff, and but we won't go there on that. Yeah, we won't go there on that. And so, when you started watching the prequel trilogy as that started coming out, what'd you think about it?
So obviously, I was a kid,
Mhm.
and so I really enjoyed them growing up. The first year of when the Phantom Menace came out, I had figures from then, Darth Vader or Darth Maul, I should say.
Mhm.
I don't know if you remember, they had those coin banks that you could link. There was an Obi-Wan, a Qui-Gon, and
Yeah.
a Darth Maul. I had
Mhm.
the Darth Maul one, and then I think I had Darth Maul's lightsaber too from that
Okay.
time. And then again for Halloween that year, me and my brother were Darth Maul and Jar Jar. Um, and I distinctly remember too, for whatever reason, there was a Pizza Hut like collab with the Phantom Menace, and they had
Yeah.
all these Star Wars toys back then too.
Mhm.
So I remember a lot of the merchandising back then, especially, was like crazy.
Yeah.
But I liked them growing up. Especially like I said, Revenge of the Sith. I still think is a great movie, and I loved it back then. I actually got out of school a little early to see it, which was really
Yeah.
cool.
So that would be your second favorite out of the trilogies then, is Revenge of the Sith?
So I would put the whole original trilogy before that.
Okay.
If I had to rank them, Empire's my first, then A New Hope, then Jedi, but then Revenge of the Sith.
Oh, okay. Okay. Awesome. Yeah. And so who is your favorite movie character? So this is where it's going to you have to condense yourself a little bit here, because there's a lot of characters in the movies as well, and more or less than the EU. But who is your favorite movie character?
I would have to say Luke.
Luke?
Yeah,
Okay.
definitely Luke.
Okay.
Obviously his whole, story, the hero's journey story from humble beginnings to Jedi Master and bringing his father back to light, being hope in the galaxy. It's just a great character from beginning to end. And yeah, I love him.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. So would you say that he's the one that got you into the EU, or is it because you got into the Battlefront game? So which how did you get into the EU? Excuse me.
So I read a lot of the young adult, like junior novels growing up.
Okay.
The Jedi Apprentice books with Obi-Wan, I read through those.
Nice.
And then the Boba Fett books came out during that time too. And then all the junior novelizations of the movies, which I have those still. And so I read a lot of the books in school because we would have like reading time, and I would gravitate towards the Star Wars books that we had in class. Yeah. And then again, being a huge video gamer, that's where I kind of started to see some of the more, I guess, like greater picture EU themes. So Battlefront 1 and 2, I still play Battlefront 2 online, like to this day, all the time. Nice. Republic Commando, which is where I got my name from for on Twitter, but love that game. The Dark Forces game, absolutely love. Being a big Doom fan, I love that it has the Doom gameplay in the Star Wars universe. And Kyle Katarn is just an amazing character too. Yeah. And then the 2003 Clone Wars animated series really got me into it too.
Okay. Awesome. Yeah. I mean, you've gotten there so many different directions and stuff. Do you think that Luke Skywalker kind of influenced you to continue to want to know what happened?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, obviously the way that Return of the Jedi ends is very satisfying if it was to end there, but knowing that there was so much more to his story going on afterwards, I mean, it was definitely, part of what drove me to it, to kind of see like what happened with that. Yeah.
Yeah. And I also asked the chat to ask questions, and we'll go through them. They're asking questions. So what would be your favorite EU novel and why?
So currently, I would say it is Darth Bane Rule of Two. Okay. And I recently read through those because it's the first Old Republic setting. The Old Republic is kind of the area I'm least familiar with because I haven't actually played those games or read those comics yet. It's on my to get to. So the Darth Bane trilogy was my first foray into the Old Republic, and it's such an interesting and different time period that it just really kind of stuck out to me. But then the philosophies of Darth Bane are so interesting. I find the Sith stories in particular, the Darth Bane, Darth Plagueis, to be really interesting because you don't get a lot of that in the other material as far as like what the Sith actually think, what their doctrine looks like. And I really liked seeing kind of I guess what I would call like the modern Sith doctrine kind of build up in that the Bane trilogy in general. And I really liked seeing it come to a head in Rule of Two. And then it all kind of climaxes on that Duel on Tython, which I think is one of the best read or best written Star Wars like duels in the entire EU, because I just think it's brilliantly written, it's engaging, and kept me on my toes the entire time. And it made you're rooting for the villain, which is something kind of weird, right? Like especially in Star Wars, like usually you root for the heroes, but in this case you're rooting for the villain to come out, which was also kind of interesting, especially after reading the Jedi versus Sith comic with Farfalla in that, and here he is returning again. And so like you were rooting for Farfalla in the comic, but now you're rooting for Bane in the novel, and it just completely turned the dynamic on its head, which I loved. Yeah. So what did you think about how like the dynamic between Darth Bane and his apprentice Zana? Zana, yeah. Sorry. I really liked it. I mean, Zana starts off very naive in a lot of ways, but she's also very I mean, she was a victim of war basically, right, as a child. And And so it's interesting because you can kind of see why she would grow up kind of being angry or cold or distanced because of being a victim of war. But then you also kind of see that manipulation from Bane throughout it that she's kind of aware of, but accepting of at the same time. And I found that dynamic incredibly interesting. And then they were kind of also, this is, I guess, more so in the third novel, but how they're kind of constantly trying to outsmart each other and stay one step ahead of each other. I love seeing that kind of stuff.
Yeah, it gives us like the flavor of like what the rule of two is going to be in the future, and how the apprentice needs to step up, but by stepping up, they have to kill their master. And she was so deceitful with that in the end. It was like he didn't know, he thought she was weak. And she was like, I'll show you. Just wait.
Which to me showed she really understood what Bane was teaching.
Yeah. Exactly. That's a really phenomenal story. So how do you think, like, what do you think about Bane's arc and how he became a Sith so far?
Like from the beginning to like when he was like a minor and all that?
His conflict with his dad, how his dad like was, talking shit about him, about how his mom's death and all of that.
I think it's a perfect catalyst, especially if you're going into a Sith versus a Jedi role, obviously, but that anger and that weight and that, he was desperate to kind of get out of that mining colony and become something greater. And that opportunity was presented to him and he took it with a vengeance. And he stumbled, like, obviously, his first duel against the Zabrak student. I can't remember his name right now. But, he eventually overcame that and truly learned what the Sith were. Even more so than his masters. And I really liked that that he specifically would look towards the older generation of Sith too, where a lot of the current Sith were ignoring the teachings of the old. He embraced the teachings of the old, and it made him a better Sith because of it. Yeah.
So we might have an idea who your favorite Sith is, unless you have someone that is that you highly like over Bane, but who's your favorite Jedi?
So definitely Darth Bane is my favorite Sith. Favorite Jedi, I kind of go back and forth between Luke, especially in the EU with how he becomes Grandmaster, and Kyle Katarn, because I really like him and his art too. By the way, I'm also a big Ninja Turtles fan, so nice screen name there.
I know, and I see you have instruments behind you, a guitar and stuff. So that's very fascinating. So you have electric right there. So
I got 4 electric guitars, 2 acoustic, and a bass right there.
Oh, dang. That's nice. My family, my grandfather owned a music shop. When he was in their services, he played in different orchestras and could play almost every single instrument that you put in front of him. So I have some of that background. So it's amazing to see the multi-talent that you're showing here, like with gaming, loving the EU, getting into music, all of that. That's amazing. So just a little bit more to the audience about you as well. So that's awesome. And so what is your favorite comics or comic series or comic? Do you have one?
So I would have to say Crimson Empire.
Okay.
I love Kirk Canos. He's probably my top 3 Star Wars characters. He's such an angsty but interesting. I always say that my favorite character archetype is the too angry to die characters, like Doom Guy or Kratos from God of War, characters like that. And Kirk Canos just fills that role perfectly, where he's just too angry to die, and he does his thing. Plus, as like a follow-up to Dark Empire, I think it's perfect. And when I first read Dark Empire, I had a lot of issues with it in the terms of like pacing and like things like that. And I felt like Crimson Empire fixed a lot of it. It provided a lot of backstory that was needed in Dark Empire and kind of pushed it forward. And it filled in a lot of those gaps. And I love Crimson Empire.
Yeah, and that's what I love about the EU, because if there's something that's kind of missing in previous works, because we knew after Thrawn Trilogy, that's when they started gearing down and buckling down and keeping the EU more coherent, because they wanted everything to be in continuity with the saga, and they consider them the saga. and stuff. And so that's what I love about like when other material starts coming out, they have the opportunity to say linking the past with the present, and also filling in something that, you know, didn't quite get crossed over with, you know, the audience and what's supposed to be, are filling in those holes that was, you know, that was never considered before. So that's, you know, so you hit it on the nail with that, with the comics there, is that, you know, that's what they do and that's what they help with. And they also are a very fun story. Everybody I talk to about Crimson loves them. So yeah,
it's so good.
Yeah. And then and I was going to ask this, and so me and Boba Fett, who is your favorite EU character? You know, I can understand if it changes, because that does for me, you know, depending on where I'm at in the EU and what I'm revisiting. So who at the moment is your favorite EU character, or is there someone that stands out a lot for you?
So I'll limit to a small handful.
Okay.
Darth Bane, obviously, like right now, because it's fresh in my head. I just read those books, like I think 3 months ago, something like that. And I just really love the philosophies and everything of Darth Bane. And then, like I said, Kirk Canos and Kyle Katarn are up there for me as well. And then I'm a huge Republic Commando fan, both the games and the novel. So I would say I kind of consider Delta Squad and Omega Squad like their own character unit, if that makes sense, because they all play off of each other so nicely. So whenever I'm like talking about characters, that I consider them like one character almost. And then Captain Fordo, just because he's so cool in that 2003 series.
Yeah, man, I wish we'd have got more of him.
I know, he like showed up, was a badass for a couple episodes, and then we never saw him again.
I know, and like I said, he is one of those phenomenal characters. I wonder how he would have handled Order 66.
Yeah, I would be really curious about that too.
Yeah, that is something, like some of these characters that we see and then we don't see anymore. It's like, I wonder how they would have handled the situations that's happening as the storyline goes along in their time period and stuff. And, you know, we will probably never get that. Now we will only get like fan what ifs. So what is your fan what ifs with Captain Fordo?
Definitely like what if with Order 66.
Yeah.
I don't know. I would just love to see more stories of him in general. Almost, I would, you know, a story with him with one of the commando units would be very cool. To kind of see maybe a one-off mission, or even if a set in the Imperial era, if he lived to be an Imperial, you know, commander during that time, see what he would have been like as a stormtrooper, an ARC stormtrooper, or something like that.
Yeah. I know there's so many like what ifs, like even with Zana, like, because, you know, there was a potential novel series about her, trilogy, or at least one that was supposed to come out about her. And that also with Jaina Solo, we were going to get the Sword of the Jedi and stuff. And now we can only just imagine what happens with those two characters and other characters within the timelines and those time periods and stuff. But we do know that during the time of atonement, those 1,000 years before we get to the PT and stuff like that, and the Sith are lying low and they're studying the Jedi and stuff like that, do you think that, you know, the Darth Bane book really aligns really well with coming up to Darth Plagueis novel and like what they have been doing in the time period that we really don't see?
Yeah, I think it fits in really well. That's actually something I wish that we would have gotten more novels for, like you said, with Anna and her apprentice Darth Cognis. I would have, because Cognis was a very interesting character that kind of showed up at the end, and then they kind of alluded to her being more important, but then it ended.
Right.
So I would have liked to see like if she was eventually, you know, overtook Xana, and the whole Sith line. I find extremely interesting, like who apprentices who and the offshoots of that. Like even if they just did a source book of like a Sith family tree, I would have loved to see everything from, you know, especially the Bane line from Bane down to Plagueis, who taught who. But of course, when we get to Plagueis, the rule of two is kind of falling apart at that point.
Right.
But you know, kind of as a lead into that, I really liked, especially because it's addressed too, where Plagueis actually says that he's ignoring the rule of two because he believes that a unified, you know, Sith, and especially because he's planning on immortality. So in his mind, I'm never going to die. You're never going to die. We're just going to take over and defeat the Jedi, and that's going to be it. Which I think makes complete sense. If he's saying we're all just going to live forever, why would you need the rule? Why would an apprentice need to succeed the master if everyone's just going to live forever?
Right. Exactly. And so that goes with, have you read the Revenge of the Sith novel yet?
Yes, that's actually one of the first novels I had back in
That
back in
is
the day.
the most phenomenal movie and / EU novel. I think that would be my top rating novel, just because it gives you so much depth with what it sets up from the PT era, or the Old Republic era, at the end of it, towards the dark the Dark Ages or whatever, to the coming of the new Jedi Order. And one thing that really resonated with me was the last chapter, which is called The New Jedi Order, and how Yoda sat and was contemplating his mishaps with the Order, and how he failed to evolve the Order while the Sith were sitting behind in the background studying the Jedi Order and how to defeat them, how to manipulate them, and stuff like that. And so what do you think about that when it comes to, knowing what you know with Darth Bane all the way up to Plagueis, and then basically Palpatine, who is now basically changing some of the rules with the Order, but is also the successor to the Sith throne, I guess you can say, on the Revenge and coming in as an emperor? What do you think about that whole scenario?
I mean, from Palpatine's side, it was genius 4D chess.
Yeah.
I mean, especially as you see in that Darth Plagueis novel and the Revenge of the Sith novelization, and all that, kind of how that works together. I mean, he was playing both sides of the Clone Wars as if he was on neither side. He was just playing everything.
Right.
But then I also really like that those moments of reflection from Yoda, and Obi-Wan had that same in I think it was the Rebel Force, at the beginning of the Rebel Force novels. I think it was that. But then when they're all reflecting on kind of what happened, and it's true. The Jedi fell to hubris, and they were blind, but they just thought, oh, the Sith had been around for a millennia. They're never going to come around. We don't need to worry about it. And then they were completely blindsided when Palpatine, played 4D chess and surprised everybody. But yeah, I love moments of like that, of the reflection. I think the Kenobi novel did a great job doing that as well, with the journal entries. And I've been reading the Last of the Jedi right now. It's kind of what I'm in the middle of.
Okay.
And there's moments like that at the beginning too, when Obi-Wan is reflecting on everything that had happened. And I think those are some of the most like genuine moments for the Jedi, because that's when they kind of realize, like, oh, we kind of screwed up a little bit, and we're completely blinded by what we thought was going on. And I love how like genuine that all feels. Yeah.
And it was like perfect mastermind from the Sith as well, that Palpatine basically gained from, and all that. But I'm leading up to this. So what is your favorite Yoda moment? Do you have a favorite Yoda moment?
So I love in Empire Strikes Back when he first appears and he's annoying Luke. I love like crazy crackhead Yoda. It's one of my like favorite things. I think it's hilarious. I love that he is like all over Luke, testing his patience. Yeah. And then of course it's revealed it is an actual test of patience.
Right.
And I just love that whole moment, because he is extremely annoying there and all over the place. And then when it comes out that it's a lesson, you're like, oh, okay. Like that all just completely made sense.
Yeah. And I wish other people realized that was a test. It wasn't that he was actually being crazy because he sat on Dagobah by himself this whole time. Yeah. It was a test of his virtue and patience and all that stuff. Basically tested him as a Jedi or coming apprentice, and how he would handle, how he would come into compassion and understanding and all that stuff. And I wish people would understand and not use that against even George Lucas when it came to Yoda, because I see a lot of that. I do. It's like, you do not understand what's going on there. This isn't because he's just this crazy green little man. Yeah. Although it is fun and hilarious at the same time, but there's a point to it. There's a point. It leads up to a point, and that's the point there. And and it's, of course, it's in your favorite movie as well. What do you think about R2-D2? This is popped in my head. This is very random. What do you think about R2-D2?
Like in general, or just in that?
Yeah, just in general, just because him and C-3PO, but I'm not going to get into C-3PO right now. But basically, he's the one that has recorded and witnessed everything
Mhm.
because we know that C-3PO got his mind wiped. So basically, he's seen and witnessed everything. So what do you think about him?
I mean, I love R2. He's such a, adorable little droid and everything that he does, and he's got his own sense of humor, even though he doesn't speak English or basic any language that we can understand, and yet he still gets this humor across, which I really enjoy. But as like a recorder of history, I mean, I think it makes sense. He's a very like loyal to his friends kind of droid, and I think C-3PO has a mouth and he blabs, and that makes sense that they would wipe his mind, whereas R2 could be trusted not to spill the beans about anything that was going on, and could be trusted to handle more, I guess, like sensitive information in the time. But yeah, I think it's smart writing in that sense.
Yeah. So I have one little quiz question here for you, and you probably know this, but my quiz questions on Talking to You is just about fun. What is when is the thought bomb first written into the lore?
So that was in the Dark Forces novelization. I think it was the second book.
The Jedi Knight one. Yeah.
Yeah. So that was when it was first written.
Yeah. And so what are your thoughts on the thought bomb and how Darth Bane, so we're going back now into time again, how he tricked Khan into using the thought bomb for his,
I mean, again, brilliant.
Mm-hmm.
Bane was a master strategist too, every bit as I would say Palpatine was in many ways, with the way that he completely dismantled the Sith Order at that time. But what I find extra interesting was that he implanted that the launching of the thought bomb as it was Khan's idea, which I think is like a brilliant. You can get people to do things that you want them to do when they think it's their own idea, and that's just like perfect.
Yeah. It's an Order Chat review has a point here. The Null Arcs denied the Order outright. So I know you've read into all of that. So what do you think about that, like that arc there?
It makes sense. I mean, they're more independent. They are able to think more rationally and more big picture. So that made complete sense to me that they would ignore it, just because they saw what was going on and kind of did a thing. I think the Commandos did the same thing, especially Darman. So that made as you're more independent, you'd be more willing and to reject the Order. Plus, they saw a different side of the war. They weren't the grunts that were constantly being killed in battle.
Correct.
So they understood that in many ways the Jedi were doing all they could, whereas many of the grunts kind of saw the Jedi as like poor leaders. So that would make complete sense to me that the Nulls would
yeah.
That.
It's such a great story behind them and stuff. And like when the Bad Batch came out, I did a huge long thing about the Nulls, the arcs, and how the Bad Batch was a poor imitation of them. That's they're trying to recreate that and stuff. And that's what we see a lot today in Star Wars, is that we're seeing a lot of poor rehashes with the previous continuity, are the real Star Wars and stuff. And I think that's what disenfranchised a lot of us, is that they're like, oh, well, we'll give you some EU. We'll try to integrate it in there and stuff. But it's very dishonest. It bastardizes the original intention of those characters, the lore or whatever. And so many people didn't quite understand why we feel and think the way we do. So when now going back from the beginning, when we first came live, what did you think about when you got the news that the EU was being tossed?
So at first, I would say skeptically optimistic.
Okay.
Because I remember they've announced the new Star Wars movie, Force Awakens, and they also announced the new Battlefront. And being a huge Battlefront fan, I was like, okay, Battlefront's coming back. I might be on board. So I was at least gonna check it out and kind of see what they did with it. I mean, I come from a background of also reading comic books and things of that nature, and they're constantly getting rebooted and there's different versions of things, and so it wasn't like new. The idea of rebooting wasn't like new or to me.
Mhm.
But very quickly after it kind of started launching and coming out, I started to get more and more negative about it.
Yeah.
The Battlefront games that came out were not really what I wanted, especially made by EA. They were kind of these microtransaction filled messes with loot boxes that turned out to be more so like Battlefield reskins than actual true Battlefront games, in my opinion.
Okay.
And then the movies came out. I remember first seeing Force Awakens, and I didn't hate it, but I didn't love it either. I was just kind of like, it's okay. Like, I'll see where they go with it. Rogue One came out, kind of felt the same way. It was very forgettable to me. I know a lot of people consider like Rogue One the best of the Disney movies.
Yeah.
I thought it was very kind of slow, and none of the characters really like stuck out to me. It was very kind of generic, and also it was not as interesting as Dark Forces was to me. I mean, Kyle Katarn has such charisma, and not having a character like that in their version was lacking to me. Really what turned me against it was The Last Jedi. When I saw that, I mean, I went with a group of friends and we left the theater. Like, theater was silent after the movie, for one thing. And then we immediately after were like, we need to get a drink. We immediately like went to a bar and we were just like drowning our sorrows over a couple beers. And we were just like, what the hell was that? Like, what did we just watch?
Yeah.
And from that point on, I was like very just like, I didn't like the direction that they took characters, especially Luke and Leia. I was just like, what is going on here? And then obviously like third movie in that trilogy came out, and I was just like getting so disenfranchised with the whole thing. And so that's kind of when I started getting back into the EU heavily, because I was like, I haven't liked these movies a lot. I watched the first 2 seasons of Mandalorian too, and I was like, yeah, they were okay, but I wasn't loving them. And at the time, I drive long distances for where I work. It takes me about like a half hour to an hour to get to and from work every day. And I was like, I need to find an audiobook or something to try and see if I like, because at the time I wasn't into audiobooks yet. Now I love audiobooks. They're like my favorite way to actually like experience the EU. But I found Josh Adams' fan audiobook for Republic Commando Hard Contact on YouTube. And I listened through that and I was like, this is amazing. Absolutely loved it. Completely reinvigorated my interest in Star Wars. And ever since then, I've been listening to audiobooks regularly.
Yeah. So what would be your favorite audiobook then? Like, because they have so much depth, because it's almost like you're just listening to the movie, basically, if it was a movie.
So I really liked it was Scoundrels was really good. I like that audiobook. And Mark Thompson's Lando is like perfect. He does Lando so well.
I agree with that. Yes, he does.
So I like that one a lot. And I also liked the there was that other Han Solo one. It was why am I drawing a blank here? Oh, Honor Amongst Thieves. That one I really liked too. Especially because they included the Scarlet Hark short story with it. And most of the time the audiobooks don't include the short stories. But they included it for that one, which I really liked. And then another one that really stuck out to me, it was the Mall Lockdown. Okay. Because that one, like all 3 of the Joe Schreiber audiobooks are interesting because they take more of a horror aspect to them. The sound effects they have like shrieks and screams and kind of industrial sounds of ships creaking and things, and it creates a really atmospheric experience. But I really liked the narration for Mall Lockdown, especially like Maul's voice. Just stuck to the character like really well. Yeah, exactly. Did you listen to, after the Obi-Wan Kenobi series came out, did you listen to the Kenobi Audible? So I actually listened to it before it came out, but yeah, I did. Okay. What'd you think? That was really good too. Yeah. Yeah, all the like hearing, like reading it versus hearing it. Reading it is phenomenal because you get to hear inside your head. But when you listen to it and you have all the nuances of Star Wars, the sound effects, all of that, and you get to hear the frustration in Kenobi's voice. Very phenomenal, because you get to experience it more than what you imagined in your head. Yeah, I think Jonathan Davis, who narrated that one, is also a great narrator. He's probably my second favorite behind Mark Thompson for a lot of them. Sometimes I even like his narrations more, to be honest. but I love his voices are really good, especially when he does like characters from the movies. I think he's pretty like spot on.
Yeah.
The one thing about Jonathan Davis narrations that I kind of noticed is that he kind of tends to make everyone sound Southern. Like if they're side characters, they kind of have like a Southern drawl to them, I feel. But
I have to
yeah,
go back
I love his narrations
to that
too.
now and notice that, because I didn't notice that. Now I'm gonna have to listen and see, and then I'll let you know on Twitter. You're right, because I didn't pick up on that. So I'm gonna have to listen to that now. I'll have to go back and play it back and stuff. Yeah. So now I forgot what I was gonna ask you next, but that's okay. Let's see here. So basically, what is your favorite era of Star Wars?
Yeah, so there are two eras I think as of right now are kind of sticking out to me that I'm really interested in. One is like right after Endor, during the formation of the New Republic, especially around the X-Wing series timeline.
Ooh, yeah.
The comics and novels are great. I recently read those comics shortly before I started the Darth Bane stuff, and great stuff. And then I also really like the era between A New Hope and Empire Strikes Back, which I know has like probably the most amount of content as far as like everyone wanted to write the story between those two movies.
Right.
But I also think it's a very interesting time because we still have a more naive Luke who has yet to kind of grow into the role of being a Jedi and a leader, which I find very interesting. And it's also during that time where Han is still very conflicted about joining the Republic or the rebellion, full time.
Yeah.
And I really like that too, because you can kind of see his internal monologue as this is all growing, where he starts off very hesitant, and then as the books go on, he's kind of like, all right, yeah, I'll stick around. This rebellion thing's kind of cool. And I really like seeing that too, because Han's just, a great character in general, but kind of seeing into his mind a little bit more and how it all works in his brain is just so fun to read through.
Yeah. Yeah. And so since like Luke is the one that like was a pivotal character for you from the beginning, tell us a little bit more about how much or what you liked about his character arc going into the EU.
Yeah. So, for all the way from like, I would say A New Hope to Return of the Jedi, what I really like seeing is his growth. Starting from naive farm boy to confident and strong Jedi master, really. I love seeing that. And like, especially in novels, like I brought up like Rebel Force, which is a young adult series, but I think that does a really good job of kind of capturing who Luke is during that before Empire period. And then going through there. And then, of course, I love seeing that he becomes Grandmaster and has a family. And, Mara Jade is a great character. And so I think that, that his whole arc, meeting her in the Thrawn trilogy, is really good because he kind of humbles him in the beginning when they're stuck in, the forest together. And then over time, as he's becoming more confident, the people around him are also becoming more confident in their abilities and who they are as people. And then it all climaxes in his creation of the new Jedi Order and his family with this, the Skywalkers. And it's just a great story from beginning to end, seeing this farm boy who is really a nobody on a backwater planet that nobody cares about. I mean, it's not even Empire controlled. They don't even care about it that much.
Right.
To become the most important person in the galaxy, where, everyone is looking up to him and he's able to kind of grow, and seeing that growth is just so cool.
And okay, outside of the Thrawn trilogy, because everybody usually says Thrawn trilogy is my absolute favorite. What is your favorite book outside of the Thrawn trilogy? Like in that era?
In that era?
Yeah.
I like the X-Wing books a lot. Those would be up there. If I had to pick like a novel, this is before Thrawn trilogy. But I really liked the Allegiance Choice of One duology.
Okay.
That had some really good Mara Jade moments, and I think it led really well into the Thrawn trilogy, especially because I think it was Choices of One had those little Thrawn Easter eggs thrown in towards the end, where you can kind of see him building his status as an Imperial officer. So I really liked those books, especially allegiance because it felt almost like an extension of Republic Commando too, in the way that those stormtroopers were, was it the Hand of Judgment, are almost like their own commando unit, which I thought was cool.
And which we share that they broke away from the cloning significantly during that time period. So then you have more people who have their own minds that's not manipulated by genetic alterations, which I'm going to go back in time and then we'll come back to the New Republic era or the, the original lore, or original OT era. What do you think about the Clone Wars, Filoni Clone Wars, and the chip that was introduced?
So I hate the chip. I'm very vocal about that. I just really hate it. I know a lot of people are like, oh, it justifies like why they would turn. And I know in Filoni's version of the Clone Wars, he kind of has more of a relationship between the clones and the Jedi. But with everything that came before it, with the multimedia project especially, and the Republic Commando novels, it just doesn't work for me in that way. And I much prefer how it was in the multimedia project, where it was a drawn out war and the clones were sick of seeing their brothers die at the hands of what they viewed was an inept leadership. And so I personally much prefer that the clones had agency with Order 66, and they chose to either kill the Jedi or not kill the Jedi, because they were either, most of the the troops were sick of the war, sick of seeing their brothers die, just wanted an end to it, and they viewed the Empire as something greater, something better. They didn't realize at the time, especially, that the Empire was going to be evil. They just thought it was the end to a war. They saw Palpatine as strong leadership. They saw Vader as strong leadership, and that's from the Cry of Shadows comic, especially, where they kind of showed that. And the clone from that was very disenfranchised, really, when he realized that Vader was doing all this evil. But I much prefer that, and especially with like the arcs and the Commandos turning against the Order, and it makes just for a much more interesting and dynamic story, where you have clones turning against the Order, rebelling against each other. There was the clone rebellion on Kamino and other various rebellions with things, and just created a much more dynamic and interesting and natural feeling story than like a Deus Ex Machina cop out of, oh, they have brain chips and that's why they turned. It just felt very like cheap and kind of lazy to me in that respect.
And it also went against the movies. It went against both Attack of the Clones, because when they were introduced, they talked about genetic alterations and not inserting a biochip or any kind of chip that would command the brain and change the structure of the brain. I wouldn't even say change, but basically, command the brain, and versus the genetic alterations, and then allowing some room to have some more dramatic nuances of some clones not wanting to, versus some clones that are like, basically, I'm going to do what I do because this is exactly what I was programmed to do. So it gives a unique plot twist, I guess you can say, a unique arc on that, Sidious or Palpatine didn't have total control, and all of that too. So
the interesting thing about the connection to the movies too is that the Kaminoans were not evil, and they were in charge of all of the cloning process. And so you think that they would have noticed, like, what is that thing that they're asking us to put in them? Like, at no point is a question asked. Like, Obi-Wan was there seeing the cloning process. He saw the genetic makeup of the clones. He was there for everything. And he never once said, like, what is that in their brain? And then the Kaminoans were never like, oh, like, there's a chip in there. Because they, if they were good, but like how it is implied in those movies as not being part of Palpatine's plan or anything, you think they would have noticed that Palpatine had ordered a brain chip in there. Like, none of it really made sense to me.
Not whatsoever, and it takes, like you said, they were good at what they did, the Kaminoans, but to put a chip in there, like they were basically, they knew how to, manipulate genetics, beings, and change them and stuff, like, to where the body even basically adapted to it and didn't reject the changes and stuff, as we've seen like later on when Sidious started cloning even himself, and also there was other cloning like Jura Sabayoth. How we see how there was people who didn't really understand cloning as well, so some of the products weren't favorable. And so you get that the brilliance of the chameleons, and then later on how people try to imitate them and how sometimes they weren't successful, how their greed wanted to speed up cloning, and how Force deals with the cloning. There's so much dynamic with cloning. So what do you think, how do you think about the dynamics of the arc and the lore when it came to cloning with the original cloners, I guess you can say, versus Sidious cloning himself and other Jedi being cloned as well? What do you think about those arcs?
Yeah, so obviously, cloning is a huge part of Star Wars lore in general, and in the in universe, I feel like cloning was something that wasn't unheard of. That conversation between Dex and Obi-Wan in Episode 2, where he was explaining that the Kaminoans were cloners, didn't seem like a foreign concept to Obi-Wan. So the entire idea of cloning doesn't seem like it was centralized to just the clones that we see during the Clone Wars, but it was this general idea. They were cloners in universe. That was their profession, or it was a type of science that was common for that. And it's just that the Kaminoans were they perfected it. They were the masters of it. They were the best species to do it in the universe. Yeah. And so then when it reach out to the expanded universe concepts from, like you said, Dark Empire or the Thrawn trilogy, or even the Force Unleashed with Starkiller getting cloned, I think that it made sense. They were using a science in an unperfected way. They were rushing it to try and get clones made fast. So the cloning process on Kamino took a long time. It took years to perfect, to make sure that there weren't any aberrations and that there weren't behavioral issues or anything like that. So when you take that concept and then speed it up to something where they're making clones, in just a couple of months, and they have hundreds, there's going to be problems because they're taking something that should take years and then they're making shortcuts. So the clone madness thing, made sense to me. And then you throw the Force sensitivity on top of it. And you have clones that they're accelerated and they're growing. And then all of a sudden they realize that they have these crazy powers and perceptions that no one else in the galaxy does. I mean, yeah, it would make sense if you were literally nothing, and then 2 days later you're an adult who has the ability to manipulate everything around you. I mean, it would absolutely drive somebody mad.
Yeah, and I think the dynamics with that and showing like how masters of the art of cloning can do it so well versus those who just want to speed up the process and do it for their own greed and blah blah blah. You see the clear line cut between that, like in Dark Empire and then even in the Thrawn trilogy. So with that, so we're going back into the New Republic era now. What did you think about both Dark Empire and Thrawn trilogy? If I'm pretty sure you might know like the little qualm, I guess you could say, between the two authors and stuff. So what do you think about the stories in general when it handled the clones and handled the lore, and then also your opinion on, like the authors and their approach with each other?
So I really loved the Thrawn trilogy when I first read it. Still do. I think it's really well written. I really like the greater EU concepts that are introduced in that trilogy. I mean, pretty much everything that's important, not everything, but most things that are important with the EU later are kind of first introduced here with like characters. You have Thrawn, Mara Jade, the Nogri. You have Garm Bel Iblis. You have all these side characters that are here, and then you also have the birth of Jason and Jaina. So everything kind of like stemmed from that, I felt. And whereas Dark Empire was an important, I would say, bridge from the movies to an expanded universe idea. So I guess in big concept terms, the Thrawn trilogy felt more like a sequel, a continuation, whereas Dark Empire felt more like a bridge to me. Okay. More so than a sequel in itself. I think I mentioned this earlier. I'm very mixed on Dark Empire in general.
I think a lot of people are.
When I first read it, I don't think the pacing is great. The art is takes a while to grow on you. The writing is kind of wonky in places. When I first read it, I didn't like it. But since like reading it, I have grown to really appreciate it for like kind of what it did, but also more so it also brought greater concepts of cloning, but also the essence transfer, which we saw expound on in the Bane trilogy and Darth Plagueis and Crimson Empire. And so that I felt almost was like what the heart of the EU was in a way, where they would introduce something and then expound upon it later, which I guess the Thrawn trilogy did too with all the characters. But in that sense, it was like with the EU especially, there's things in there that I don't necessarily love all the time, but it's always made better when another thing kind of expands on it or improves on it, and then you're able to go back later with this other knowledge of, oh, well, now I understand what essence transfer is. Now I can appreciate the story that was told in Dark Empire a lot more than when I first read it and had no idea what was going on.
Oh my God. So we have an EU person here that doesn't like some stories or some approaches, but then yet they say that we just blindly love everything. I just had to put that out there. We all have our opinions. In fact, we probably, like you and I, probably like things and like the same things and may not like the same things. And that's the beauty of the EU, is that we get to take what we like and, and digest that and stuff like that. And we may not agree on some things that we all like or dislike or whatever, but the story's still there. The story still expands on each other, still keeps continuity fairly well, or tries to, and all of that. So I think there's a lot of misconceptions when it comes to the EU being all bad, and or we just blindly love everything, and and all that. So I have another quiz for you. So who was Darth Bane's original name? What was his original name?
Oh, so trying to think, because Bane was the nickname that his dad gave him.
Right.
I'm trying to think what he went by before that. I'm drawing a blank right now.
Okay, it's I would say Dessel, Dessel.
Yeah.
Yeah, so Dessel. So that was his name, and his dad was freaking hard on it. His dad was cruel. Like, he was one of the catalysts to set Bane off on his path as well, and then being in the mines as well. A rough life that led him to become a Sith. Do you think that if he had exposure, oh damn, my thing's going out. Do you think that if he had exposure to the Jedi, and we know he did have some, but do you think that if he had a more positive exposure to the Jedi, do you think he would have went that way?
I honestly don't.
Okay.
He had such a rough upbringing, and he had so much pent up rage and animosity towards his father, especially, that I think even if he did start on the Jedi, he eventually would have turned to the dark side, just because he was so angry at pretty much everyone. And he always strove to be something greater. Whereas the Jedi kind of shunned personal greatness.
Pride and all that stuff. Yeah.
He was way too prideful. He wanted to be he too much wanted to be something.
Yeah.
Where I don't think the Jedi would have let him become something.
Yeah, kind of like Anakin's thing. So it goes into Anakin's arc, because because Palpatine was feeding him, manipulating him, that you're the best, you're the chosen one, you're the best, you're the strongest. He was feeding his pride, because pride is one of the ways to the dark side. And that's, we see that with Bane. So that there's like a little echo there, like there's a little bit of like what they say, like poetry and it rhymes kind of deal. And I use that word now loosely, because so many people use it to where there's no meaning to it anymore. So with the Sith, now that we're back on that subject, what are your thoughts on the one Sith? Did you get a chance to read the Legacy comics, and what did you think about that whole arc?
So I haven't read all of the Legacy comics yet,
okay.
But I am familiar with the one Sith and that story. And I think that obviously it's an affront to the rule of two and what Bane set up, but the legacy era is so different, and it's set so far in the future that I think that it works very well as something new. Because if they were just regurgitating the same things over and over and they had the same problems and the same conflict, it would have gotten old after a while. And so I think it was very smart to kind of take a spin on it, and it's still a doctrine. It's still a league of Sith, but it's a spin on the rule of two to be, the rule of one, and it created a new conflict that we hadn't seen before that really helped make it interesting. Yeah, and then of course with Crate, I really like that it connected back to the older stuff with Obi-Wan and the Republic comics and so yeah, I love how interconnected everything is at the end of the day.
Yeah, and how much he knew of the Skywalker, the Skywalker family. Like one of the things that I loved in the Legacy comics is that Cade, who basically is a very sassy like his ancestor Mara Jade. If you haven't seen that, there he has her sense of humor, I guess you could say, and her personality traits, they're very similar and stuff, and he's teasing Crate and and he's talking shit to Crate, and then Crate was like, if I would have known, he's telling the story of Obi-Wan and how he fought him on Tatooine and how Obi-Wan humiliated him and outcasted him, and he went on his way. And that kind of, in a way, you can kind of say that set up his arc as Darth Bane in a sense, along with the new Jedi Order, the Vong too, because he did get captured by them. And then, Bane was like, and, if I would have known about the Skywalkers, blah, blah, blah. And he goes, oh, so another Skywalker one-upped you and stuff like that. And so that was so fun to read, seeing that humor and, thinking back, oh, yeah, that would what Mara J would say.
How brilliant is Cade as a character, too, being, obviously we really see three generations of Skywalker with Anakin, Luke, and then Cade, and he's very different than the other two, whereas Anakin is a hopeful kid who gets manipulated and turns evil, and Luke is a just hopeful kid, in general, who's a shining beacon throughout the entire thing. And now you have a Skywalker who is, a drug addict and miserable, but he's also not evil. So he doesn't even really have that hope that we see with the other two. And it just creates such an interesting, and it's an interesting dynamic compared to the other Skywalkers that we kind of grew up with. Yeah. To see like how can a Skywalker become a drug addict? You know what I mean? Like how can the descendant of Luke just be this miserable guy? But then he also never gives in to evil and temptation like Anakin did.
Yeah. What do you think? Okay, because we really don't get a full arc of Ben Skywalker. So what do you think about him?
So obviously, like I love Ben. I wish it's one of those things I wish we got more of. I feel like if the novels were going to continue beyond Crucible, we would have obviously gotten the Sword of the Jedi, and I feel like we would have eventually gotten more for Ben too. I would have liked to see, kind of in the same vein of where I would have liked to see like this family tree of Sith. I would have liked to continue to see how the Luke or the Skywalker family developed, who Ben marries and has kids with, and how those kids grow up. And it would be really interesting to see how the trickle down, again, coming back to Cade, like how the family develops in a way that Cade would be the way that he was, but from a bird's eye perspective of, I can kind of see now like how, Ben was like this to his kids, who were like this to their kids, who were like this to their kids, and then eventually we get to Cade. Yeah. So that would have been really cool to see. Yeah,
because when we get to Legacy and we see Bantha, his uncle, and his, and Cade's dad and stuff like that, they almost, and I'm just gonna go to that stereotype because that's just what I see, and I'm not trying to make it a bad thing, but it's almost like redneckish, kind of way, where they're like, or maybe roughnecks, maybe, or something like that. There's something like a rough ethnic, to me, Luke was soft in a sense where he brought hope and stuff, and not in a bad way, like a male feminine kind of thing, but not in a bad way. He was more like he had a compassionate gentleness with him.
Mm-hmm.
And then later on we get to Ben, to where we start seeing more of, you know, he still has good qualities of his mom and his dad, and we see the evolution of the Skywalker's character, where, you know, with Anakin, we've seen him being hopeful but wanting to change everything for the good, but then also will do it at all means possible.
Mm-hmm.
And so we have that. So we see the evolutions of the family, which I think is very dynamic and unique, which I basically like frown upon and like cringe about when people say, oh, well, Luke was never portrayed as a human qualities in the EU. And I'm like, really?
Yeah.
You know, the whole Skywalker family, basically you see the evolution of them till we get to Cade, where you would think that because he comes from this lineage, he would know better.
Yeah.
And he's like, no, fuck my Skywalker family heritage. I'm just going to do drugs and, you know, do death sticks so that I don't have my ancestor on my ass. You know?
Well, think about how different the conflicts were too for Ben versus Anakin and Luke. I mean, there were wars going on, obviously, but the threat of the Yuuzhan Vong, for example, was so much grand scale and epic, I guess, compared to even the Clone Wars, which is where Anakin was kind of being manipulated. But there was also no real like Sith threat. So I feel like that like lack of dark side manipulation until we get to when Jason turns, it wasn't really affecting Ben in that same way. We kind of see that same story with the Solo side of the family more so than the Skywalker side.
Yeah. And then Soul Assassin says Luke was a hippie and Cade was a Gen X. Laugh out loud. Yeah. And then what's so interesting is, like, you know, we have at the end of Legacy, or, you know, at the end of Legacy of Fate of the Jedi, we start seeing them handing the torch, the lightsaber to the top three of the time there, and that would be Jaina, Ben, and Jagged Fowl. And stuff. So what do you think about that arc? What were you kind of expecting? Now this goes into probably fan what if and stuff like that, since we don't have the story other than Crucible.
Yeah, so I think it's interesting for one side that the Fell family was introduced into such an important role, as kind of being an offshoot of the Skywalker family, which is cool. I find it's like kind of my weird geeky side coming out, but I love like family trees and like timelines of that, and it's so interesting. I mean, it was one timeline or family tree I saw of the entire Skywalker, Solo, and Fell family that we like knew of. And it's so interesting to see how different characters. I think it even included the Antillieses, which is cool because, you know, Wedge is down the line related also. So I love seeing like that kind of thing. So that was one thing that I thought was really cool, is that we were getting a character in a very important role as it pertained to like the big three or the big two families, I guess, that wasn't a Solo or a Skywalker, which was really cool. And then of course, obviously, like we could tell that they were kind of setting up to pass the torch. And obviously, I mean, at this time, like Han, Luke, and Leia were in their 80s. I mean, eventually they had to retire, you know, because I mean, there's only so much you can do with a character at that age. And I think it was absolutely like made complete logical sense to start passing off that torch to a new generation of characters. And who else would you do other than the kids of that family, especially when they were developed so well throughout the EU. So it's just one of those things I wish we would have gotten more of.
Who is your favorite Solo kid?
That's a good question, because I do think that Jason is interesting, especially with the way that he turned. But Jaina is just she's such a badass too, especially being trained with Boba Fett and that entire arc and everything. I guess I would say Jaina has a little bit of a leg up, but yeah, both of them are great. Yeah. Anakin always gets left out, I feel, because he had like the least going on, and his journey ended a lot earlier. But yeah, I would probably say Jaina.
what do you think about George's decision on Anakin's journey being halted because of the fact that he was going to write about his grandfather and he wanted focus to be on a different grandchild?
I think it's a little bit of a cop out. I mean, I get that from somebody who isn't as invested in the EU, you could get confused. Like if they were to put out a new novel where, you know, focusing on Anakin and they were to market it in that way, somebody who was movie only or coming in fresh might think that they were talking about Anakin from the prequel trilogy. So from a marketing perspective, I 100% get it. But from a like creative EU fan perspective, I think it's a little bit of a cop out because like people would have gotten it eventually. Just like, you know, Ben Skywalker has Ben's name from, you know, but I guess Kenobi is different. I don't know. I feel it's a little bit of a cop out, but I get it from a marketing perspective.
Yeah, because that was my point too before is like, okay, George, we have two Bens basically, you know, eventually we have two Bens. And that was never a thing, you know, like you never got upset. And I understand that Anakin is one of your boys, you know, Luke was your ultimate boy because you built, that was where we began with is Luke and stuff, but still, come on, George. Yeah, so that was, you know, unique to me. So what did you think about the new Jedi Order? Like, what was your favorite novel? What did you think about the whole arc? I know that there's, I would say, there's a mixed feeling, but I think predominantly it's still loved because of the direction it was taken with the baddies, I guess you could say, and how now we don't have the Imperial Remnant as the bad guys. They all have to team up at eventually and stuff like that. So we get a different spin-off of what can happen in the galaxy. So what was your take on that? What was your favorite novel or novels? And
yeah, so on one hand, I get the criticism in the sense that it doesn't, at least up front, it first doesn't feel very Star Wars-y. It's a brand new threat. It's not Imperial or anything of that. It's not Sith. It's this like weird new amalgamation from another galaxy that's coming, invading. But at the same time, I really like that it is something different because again, there's only so many times you can tell the same story before it starts to get stale and starts to get old. And so I think not going with just another Empire remnant or another, you know, Grand Admiral coming out of the woodwork was brilliant in the sense that it was something fresh and new and it was a real threat for something. Because at that time, the New Republic was established. You know, all of the Empire at that time were just like these little factions that they were mopping up. Basically, there was no real threat in that sense. So bringing in the Vong to be like an actual threat and something different was really smart in my opinion. And I think that most people long term kind of agree in that sense. If I had to like criticize something about the series in general, it's the length of it. I mean, there's like what 20.
There's 19
novels, 19 novels.
19. Yeah.
It's very hard to, not necessarily hard, but it's very intimidating when you sit down and you're like, okay, I'm going to get into the new Jedi Order. And then you look and you're like, oh, there's 19 novels and there's also short stories that were only online that you got to like track down.
Short stories, comics. Yeah. There's
Asian comics, like everything. Yep. So like when you look at it, you're like, oh, this is an investment. Like, it's not just like, oh, I'm going to read a trilogy and be done with it. Like it's an investment that you're gonna have to like sit through. And if you're not hooked and into it from the get-go, I mean, no one's gonna sit through 19 novels of something that they're not really enjoying. But I mean, obviously, if you are into it, it's great because then you have 19 novels of material to enjoy. But I think that was like kind of the downside of it was that people who were maybe coming into the EU with that as a first, or even if they were fans, they were just like looking for something quick to read and then realizing like, oh, this is a long series. That is something. Yeah.
And what is your favorite story out of that? Because I know we lose not only lose Anakin, we lose Chewie, which was a big, huge criticism going on the way in. And, you know, it was all George's idea. You know, even authors say so.
Honestly, the Chewie story might be my favorite. Like, I know it's controversial and a lot of people didn't like it, but for me personally, like, I love Chewbacca And if you were or we're going to kill somebody from the original trilogy, I mean, Chewbacca is just as important as Han, in my opinion.
Yeah.
I mean, he was there from the start, and to go out in such a way where, like, what more badass way can you think to go out than literally dropping a moon on somebody? Like, Chewbacca is so powerful and strong that they couldn't just kill him normally. They had to drop a moon on him. And then he's howling in defiance at the whole time, like unafraid, doing it because, like, you know, he was protecting the people that he loved. And to me, that's like the perfect way to go out. So I never really understood the criticism of that. And then it also led into a really good arc with Han kind of coming to terms with his death and going off on his own and getting really depressed. And then there was the Chewbacca solo comic that came out shortly after that kind of you know, led into that as like a good tribute to that. And I you know, I think it's great because it wasn't just like they killed Chewie and moved on. It had long lasting repercussions. It led into other arcs that I think were you know, really interesting in their own right. And then again, it was a defiant, badass way to go out. So it wasn't just like he died in battle quickly or was unceremoniously like stabbed and thrown off a bridge or something.
Yeah, and they were taken by surprise when realizing that moon was dropping, and they were all in dire needs to get people off the planet as quickly as they can with the limited resources they could or they could use. And then going back to Chewie's you know, life debt arc, you know, I think people who don't like it either don't really understand or never heard about, you know, how, you know, the Wookiees have that life debt and how they honor it to death, even when they have their partners, like, you know, Chewie and his partner, you know, she understood that he had that commitment, and that was a big honor for the whole family, for him to fulfill that commitment. And
no, that's actually one. That was actually one thing you bringing up how it was an honor for the family to have the life debt. You know, when you think about Chewbacca and having like a family and a kid and everything, on the outside, it's like he's kind of a deadbeat dad, you know, like he's going around with his best friend, like hopping around, you know, smuggling or whatever, ignoring his family. But you're absolutely right. Like, it was an honor for him to be doing that. They didn't look at it as abandonment. They looked at it as, you have a life debt. That's an important part of our culture. And that's what you're going to do. It completely makes sense.
Yeah. And, you know, like, not that Chewie needed permission to go back to his family, but Han's like, you know, you have important events, you need to go with your family, or, you know, and so he understood that he needed to go with his family as well. And so there was that fine balance. But those who never read the EU or got into even Wookiee culture would not understand that. And so they would criticize him like, oh, well, that was stupid because, you know, why didn't he get in the, you know, in the Falcon, blah, 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 you know. But when you read it, it was the dire need of getting Anakin on that ship, getting Han on that ship so they can leave. And that his defiance to what was going on with the Vong and trying to kill his loved ones and stuff was to face that moon to make sure everybody got away. And so that was very, very dynamic, very heroic to him, a badass way to go down, you know. And then going to Han, there was that criticism of Han, like, now mourning and such grief that people said that his character, that was against his character. What do you think about that?
No, I mean, if your best friend dies, like, I don't care how gruff you are on the exterior, you're gonna feel it, and it's going to affect you in a lot of ways. And especially by that time, Han had started to become a softer person in general. He still had a rough exterior, but we saw a softer side of him that even started all the way back in Empire. But especially through the novels, we see a side of him become more family oriented and
character growth.
Right, exactly. And so I don't understand why that would be a complaint. Like I said, if my best friend died, I would be so distraught over it. You know what I mean? Especially someone who's been with you for, I mean, at that time, what, like 30 years? Fought 2 wars with him and was there at his wedding. So yeah, obviously, like, he would have, of course, be depressed. And he was, even before then, he was his smuggling partner for who knows how many years, you know. So
after he saved him from imperial enslavement,
right.
And then he also, his caretaker, when he was kidnapped by Shrike,
Mhm.
was was a Wookiee as well, and so he has that, that's all he knew basically in his life is like the like the Wookiee culture and the family structure and what that meant, even though in the beginning he's like, I don't want you to stay with me for this life, that because he pushed and pulled with that in the beginning, which I
Yeah.
thought was quite funny, and then here we have now, like so many years later, he's mourning and
Mhm.
he's fighting, he's mad, there's war going on with these people, these beings they don't understand, and he didn't understand why Chewie did that in the beginning. Well, he kind of understood, but then he was in doubt of that. If he didn't want it to happen, that's common in grief.
Yep.
You go through those
Absolutely.
cycles and stuff. And then Leia, being as compassionate as she was like, go do what you need to do,
Mhm.
but
I
she was
love
still.
their dynamic in the books.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. They seen so much death, so
Mhm.
much. They, even with them in, I don't know if you read Tatooine Ghost.
I've not read that one yet.
Okay, so I'll just give a little, premise on that. So basically that's her acceptance journey, and there's a mixed review on that too, but you would have to make your own opinion on it, read it and make your own opinion. But that story is about her coming in terms with her lineage,
Mhm.
discovering who her grandmother is, and then also coming to terms with becoming a mom.
Mhm.
So there's so much dynamics in that because she's so afraid of
Yeah.
having a child that's going to turn into another Darth Vader, which we do kind of see that. And but and Han there shares a lot compassion. That man, even though he seems gruff, he's a smuggler, he's to the point, he can be very hard if he needs to. He also has a soft side. Like if he truly loves and cares about you, he is very compassionate.
Mhm.
And so he's such a phenomenal character when it comes to that. And, so he basically, when she's going through her ordeal in that story arc, he basically gives her pointers to why, maybe Anakin went the way he did and how Anakin was a hero as a young boy. And so there's so much dynamics between them in there. And we see that throughout the timeline. Did you read True Set Bakura?
I've not read that one yet either. There's a lot of those like early, like
Mm-hmm.
directly after Endor. I need to get through.
Mm-hmm.
But that whole era is fascinating to me.
Yeah.
I'm going to be getting to all those shortly. I'm trying to get through the young adult novels like first, and
Mm-hmm.
then I'm going to jump back into the into like the main novels. But
Yeah.
I'm kind of hooked on like Jude Watson's writing style right now. It's very
Okay.
interesting to me.
Yeah.
So that's kind of like what I've been reading a lot lately.
Yeah. And so with that, since you mentioned an author, who is your favorite author?
That is a very hard question.
Because they ebb and flow between series and stuff, especially the ones that are
Yeah,
consistently writing. Yeah,
it
consistently
kind of
writing.
depends like what I'm reading at that moment
Yeah.
sometimes. Um, I mean, there's John Jackson Miller, who's great. Drew Karpyshyn's great. Obviously, like Timothy Zahn.
Mhm.
Um, I don't know. I don't know if I necessarily have like a favorite author. Controversial choice. I also really like Karen Travis. I know some people
Oh
are
no,
very hit or miss with
I
her.
love her too, and like especially when she gets into Legacy of the Force and how she writes Fett and how she
Yeah,
shows Jarrus's dynamics and all of that. I mean, phenomenal. Like Bloodlines is one of the best in that
I
series.
I really like how she writes like military things, especially in
Yeah.
like the Republic Commando, how she's detailed in the weaponry and equipment that they have, and the cleaning of the equipment, and the jargon that they use, and that they have specific terms that like just the clones use. And then I also
Hmm.
really like that she kind of introduced Mandola as a culture for the clones too.
Hmm.
Really just changed them from a like a I want to say faceless, but like where they were just like cultureless before that, and then all of a sudden she introduced that in, and then you realize, oh, they have their own language and their own way of thought, and that they're
Hmm.
closer linked to Mandalorians than what the movies kind of let on. And I really like that aspect of what Karen brings to the table.
Hmm. Yeah, I do too. That's the thing, and that's so what did you think about the pacifist Mandalorians then?
So I think
We'll
it
go
could
there.
have worked if they framed it as like a sect that split off, but
Hmm.
I don't like that they framed it like they were the main Mandalorians.
Hmm.
Um, I much prefer the kind of like Viking-esque battle ready, Mandalorian that what they introduced is like Death Watch. Death Watch should have been the main faction, and then the pacifist Mandalorians should have been the rebelling faction. Like that would have made much more sense to me, and it would have connected much better with what the material that came before it. So I'm not the biggest fan of the pacifists, but they could have at least spun it in a way that would have made more sense.
Yeah. What do you think about Jango's true Mandalorians versus the Death Watch?
Yeah, I mean, I honestly didn't watch all of TCW. I watched a good chunk of it, but I didn't watch all of it just because I don't really like it very much.
Yeah.
So I watched a lot of the bigger arcs. But to me, it's like kind of almost the same thing. Like I prefer that original, Mandalorian culture to what they offered. So whether it was like Death Watch or like you said, Boba Fett's, either way, like the true Mandalorians, like I don't know, I much prefer that kind of like aspect to them.
Because the true Mandalorians would have basically, if you stray away from the culture and stuff like that, and you're just mimicking or imitating and stuff, that's a no-no in the Mandalorian culture. The pacifists should have been killed off. There should have been this huge war on that and stuff. And what's interesting, now I'm going behind the scenes, is that people are like, well, since then now the Fets are not true Mandalorians and they're just wannabes and blah 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 blah, and they rewrote the Mandalorian culture. And then like George and the company was saying, no, they're just a faction. Like the pacifists are just a faction. What happened before still happened before, and people don't realize that was said. But it still doesn't make sense for that, especially how the planet looks at the time versus what we see throughout the lore outside of that. Because absolutely. They have the capital there, they have their manufacturing companies, all of that. They have the Mandalore, which is basically, you would say, quote unquote, the ruler, or the one that just calls people to war when it's needed, and gets everybody together when it's needed, because there's really no hierarchy basically. So the culture is very interesting, how Karen Travis written it and created the language and made it so that anybody can be Mandalorian. It wasn't just a one single species, although in the beginning it was. So she was very brilliant with that, which Filoni just tore apart.
Yeah, the most interesting thing to me about the EU versus Disney's versions of the Mandalorian 2 is that when the Clone Wars had come out, and I said I haven't watched all of it, but I did watch that first Mandalorian arc when like the pacifists are first introduced and all that. And so when TCW came out, they completely rewrote like what the Mandalorians were. So the main faction is now these pacifists, and then you have these offshoots with True Mandalorians and Death Watch that are kind of like the radicals of their group. But then when we jump forward to the Mandalorian series, they're borrowing so much from the EU's versions to almost like reestablish how the EU had them as now their version. So now you have, the Sabine, and that version of them from like Rebels and all that is kind of like what the Mandalorians are now. And they very much reflect a culture of adoption, and they're more battle ready, and they're more honorable in that sense too. Viking-esque more so than the pacifist ones that we see at the beginning of TCW. And it's just really weird. Like, why would you go out of your way to like retcon that just to reintroduce that same idea later? It was just very like backwards to me.
Yeah, it was. And then, we're seeing that a lot today in the Disney lore, when it comes to Mandalorians, and so much more that now you have more factions, which is confusing, because now you can't take the helmet off, which was something a long time ago, but that was a very, very long time ago when the Tong still existed. And then that basically evolved out. And then all of a sudden you got this Darksaber introduced, which you only see in TCW, and that's it. And after that, it disappears again. It reappears suddenly and then it disappears. So that didn't make sense.
Yeah.
With that.
It's super weird.
Yeah, and then they can't even keep their lore straight on the Darksaber within their own lore and the Disney lore as well. So TJ asks, I've always thought of the CWMP, the Clone Wars military or Mandalorian, is immensely superior to the contradicting to TCW we got from overrated and pretentious Filoni. Do you also like CWMP?
Yeah, so I'm assuming that's the Clone Wars multimedia project.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I love it. I think it's great. The novels, the way that they lead into the Republic comics. There was a lot of games around that time too. There was the I think there was a 2003 Clone Wars game that kind of played like a vehicular combat kind of thing. It was almost like the Clone Wars version of the X-Wing games,
Mm-hmm.
which I thought were cool. Of course, the 2003 micro series. I love that. I think it has the best version of General Grievous and a lot of like really cool things with that series. So yeah, the multimedia project was great, and it all fed into each other very nicely, and it all led into the Revenge of the Sith very nicely. I think there's like a couple minor retcons that happened from Labyrinth of Evil to, but other than like, I think it was with the 2003, the way that they showed the Chancellor rescue was slightly different, but other than that, like slight thing, they all fit very well within each other, and they never retconned anything from the movies, which is like great. They fit it all in without needing to change anything that was presented in Attack of the Clones or Revenge of the Sith.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And Soul Assassin says the Fetts are Mandalorians. Their history goes all the way back to Cases Fett in the Old Republic, and that's a thing too. Is like you know, the Fetts, they have this huge history. You know, you have, you know, Boba Fett basically hiding out as what's his name? His Jango's adopted father. Why am I not bringing his name up?
Jaster Muriel.
Yeah, Jaster Muriel. I'm like, it starts with a J, you know, and so he uses aliases. We find out he uses aliases. And, you know, the one thing that people use against EU is, oh, well, the Fetts were so, you know, were retconned so many times, they don't make sense, blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, as the story started coming and evolving, the Fetts story evolved. And nowhere in Attack of the Clones or anywhere does, you know, does it retcon Boba Fett's family. It just shows how he came to be. And it never really retcons, in a sense, who he was, that he just, as a bounty hunter, he used aliases. And it would be, you know, using his grandfather's name would be one way of, you know, or another way of using an alias as well. And so I thought that whole like development of Boba and the Fetts was very interesting, because you got to see literally how it drawn out the family history over time. What do you think about all of that? Like with how Fetts began and how, you know, a little bit how Attack of Clones kind of changed, or not changed, but gave us more insight of how Boba Fett's family was, how he came to be, and then his history along that path.
Yeah. So, as far as like contradictions or retcons and things like that go, it makes complete sense that he would have an alias. I mean, we've seen other characters, especially bounty hunters, having aliases throughout Star Wars in general. You know, bring it back to you know, Crimson Empire. Kirk Canos went by Kennex Kill for a while. So it make, you know, why, you know, if you're hunting somebody and don't want them to know that they're being hunted, you would have an alias to kind of get information and find where they're at and that kind of thing. As far as like not making them Mandalorians, I didn't understand why they would do that in the first place, when they were so established as like they're the debut Mandalorians. And so it just felt weird to me to all of a sudden like change them to not be Mandalorians, like in Filoni's stuff. But yeah, I mean, obviously there's, with the formation of the EU, there were going to be some slight issues when it first started, because they hadn't quite settled down that they were going to have a solid continuity yet. They weren't allowed to touch the prequels, so they were kind of having to guess what George was going to do. We see that in like the Thrawn trilogy with the clones, But for me, what makes it so intelligent, the way that they fixed a lot of those things, was that they addressed them. They didn't just sweep them under the rug. They didn't just ignore them. They addressed, okay, we wrote this book years ago before we decided to have a solid continuity, and we gave Boba Fett a different origin. How are we going to fix that now that we've established that we are going to have a cohesive continuity? And so instead of ignoring it so that it just creates plot holes and things like that, they actually said, okay, we're going to write another story where he took an alias. Okay, that makes complete sense to me. A lot of people like to say like, oh, any retcons are bad. And there's a way to do them to where they make sense, especially like I said, in the sense that when things first started, they didn't have in their mind a concrete plan, and then eventually had a concrete plan. And so in that, when you're trying to fit in, then obviously you're going to have to make some retcons. Right. But I don't necessarily think that should be held against the greater EU in that sense, just because they made it work in the end. And sure, maybe you have to read 2 books now instead of 1 book for it to make sense, but they didn't just ignore it.
Yeah. The EU would be bad if they ignored points that didn't make sense, or something that the movie kind of contradicted or changed up a little bit. Because sometimes a change is not a contradiction. It just shows that, the arc is going to go a different way than maybe what people or what was intended by the company. But Boba Fett's story was never one that was really, really focused on, even though the fans loved it. And George was like, okay, he didn't die. He lived, so from there, that's everybody's like, oh crap, now we got to write about this guy and make a backstory. And so it's like, it's kind of one of those things that was a beautiful surprise to a lot of fans especially who loves the Fetts and loves the Mandalorians and the direction that they went within the Mandalorian culture, because we know that Fett or Boba, became Mandalore later on. And he was a Mandalore, like in New Jedi Order. And he had the Mandalorians played a heroic story with the New Republic, because at first they seemed like they were against and they were siding with the Vong, and then boom, we get the surprise or the subversion of no, they were just setting it up to help up the New Republic in a sense. So I thought that was a wonderful story arc right there. What'd you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, again, one of the things I always love about these stories is that these characters are outsmarting one another. And then the tactics of war and things like that. And obviously the Mandalorians being a very war-focused tactical culture. I love seeing it at play. So to kind of, push almost a false comfort, and then at the end of the day, save the day, was great. And, kind of just another thing I wanted to bring up while we were talking about Boba Fett and how he was a surprise fan favorite. I feel like that continually happens throughout Star Wars. Where obviously the original was Boba Fett, but even in the prequel trilogy, like Darth Maul ended up becoming a fan favorite, even though he was killed off, immediately. General Grievous, same thing. And so it's interesting that they have these like really cool character designs and these characters that people kind of gravitate towards and I find really interesting. But then when they're making it, they're just like, oh, they're going to be a lackey or a throwaway character. And then they end up becoming like huge fan favorites. And then they kind of have to scramble to be like, oh, okay, well, now what are we going to do with them? So in like Fett's case, it was, okay, well, he didn't die. We're going to continue it. And then, or like in Grievous's case, it was, okay, now we got to go back and flesh out his story. And I always find that like really interesting, and just that like it's the characters you don't expect to blow up that blow up.
All right, so before we end here, let's get into General Grievous. Let's go back in time and the brilliance of the manipulation towards Grievous, because I recently did talk about that, and since you brought it up, I'm like, let's just discuss this here. We know that the Sith are great manipulators, especially those who were under Sidious's faction. And Dooku, even though he seemed like this posh guy, and that has this evil side and stuff, in which Chris plays those characters so phenomenally well.
Absolutely.
We have let me go ahead and bring me onto the screen. We have the story of how he manipulated the war on Grievous's planet, how he orchestrated Grievous's ship being shot down to make it look like the Jedi, just to create the monster, this tyrant, this tool that we see as Grievous. So what is your opinion about that arc and the story and the brilliance behind Dooku on orchestrating that?
So Grievous is a really interesting character in general because he parallels so much of the other villains that we see in the prequel era. You know, you have a kind of a proud alien species that almost kind of reflects Dooku in that way, where they're both kind of like proud and in that sense. But then this anger and this hatred gets infiltrated into their mind in the same way of Darth Maul, where he's, picked up by Palpatine and he's raised on the Jedi are evil and the Jedi are doing this and that. And then Maul has this hatred for the Jedi. And in this way, Grievous is manipulated in that he thinks that the Jedi attacked him. And so he develops this hatred for the Jedi as well. And then you have the parallels to Anakin in that, his body's destroyed and they have to replace him with droid parts in the same way that Anakin's replaced with the armor and the droid parts and the breathing. And so he's like this perfect amalgamation of all of the villains that you see in the prequel trilogy kind of come together in one character. And then to take it like one step further in that, especially in the 2003 cartoon where you see that he's actually like this badass Jedi hunter, even though he can't use the Force, was really cool to see too, because you see, I guess, like from watching Phantom Menace all the way through Revenge of the Sith and then looking back, you have three different Force users, three Sith Jedi that were up until Anakin and his actual able to overturn the Jedi that failed to do it. Maul was defeated, Dooku was defeated, and in the end, Grievous was defeated too. But he was actually able to kill Jedi at a large number, where he had a collection of lightsabers from that. Where I don't think Maul I know killed a couple, but he didn't kill nearly as many as Grievous did. I just think that Grievous is such an interesting character because he's an innocent participant in the start that again gets just manipulated by everything that's going on in a really intelligent way, and he's like a reflection of everything else that we see in the prequel trilogy kind of sucked into one character.
Yeah, exactly. And so his hatred, and then when we finally get to see him in his final battle, and that's with with Obi-Wan Kenobi. He's like, I was trained in your Jedi arts by, and he, said, talks about Dooku and all of that. And, we do see in the novel, and I wish it was in the movie, but there's so much things that George had to take out of the movie because he had so much, that story was so huge. There's a lot of things that had to be taken out. But in the novel does it justice. And, he questions why, Obi-Wan questions why he's the one that was favored on going and finding and defeating Grievous. And they said it's because of his form, his lightsaber form. Was it Sorsu or something like that? Form 3. And because he mastered that. And he's like, why do you say that? And he goes, he's like, people are, jack of all trades. You're the one who comes in with this and studied and refined and did this. And, and that's why we choose you and stuff. And so he goes in with that form and, it holds true. But then at the end, he ends up killing him with the blaster, which was kind of funny. So I really like that arc with Obi-Wan as well, with Grievous as well, because in the end, he's the one, he doesn't defeat Vader. He turns him into, well, I wouldn't say he turns, like the results of Anakin becoming Vader is a result of their battle. And it was his choice of going that direction. And, but later, we see Obi-Wan and he gives himself as a Force ghost. And I wouldn't say that was a win on Vader. That was a win on Obi-Wan, because what he learned from his fights, like even with Grievous, is the wisdom of trusting the self. And that's how I see the wisdom of trusting the self and what you have learned and what, your training and stuff, eludes you and stuff like that. And we don't see basically just a little glimpse of him training to be a force ghost. We know what happens. We know that he communicates and stuff like that. But in the end result, he trusts himself and he gives himself to the greater good. And I think that was a whole beautiful arc of Obi-Wan Kenobi, which, was destroyed later on by the new company. But my point is that he, with that, we get to see the brilliance behind Obi-Wan, starting with Grievous and going on. So, yeah.
There's a line from the novel I wish they kept in the movie because it cracks me up like every time. But just to kind of show like Obi-Wan's dry sense of humor, and when he's fighting Grievous, there was that line when Grievous is like, "Oh, I was trained in the Jedi arts by Count Dooku," and the novel Obi-Wan says something along the lines of like, "Oh, that's funny. I trained the guy who killed him."
Yeah, and that was a phenomenal line.
Time, like, that should have been in the movie because it's such a perfect line. It's like such a
perfect Kenobi line too.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so that was a brilliant thing. So we're gonna start winding down. So as we close here, do you have any other things you want to say about your love of the EU or any kind of storyline or want to add to it before we close?
Yeah, I guess another interesting thing that isn't brought up very often, because I feel like there's only like 3 novels and then the young adult series, the Galaxy of Fear. But the horror aspect of Star Wars and the possibility for horror in Star Wars is so interesting to me too. I'm a big horror movie fan.
Okay.
And so I was really interested in getting to Death Troopers and Red Harvest when I was like getting through everything. And that's one thing I wish they had a 3rd book, like to make it a trilogy for. Because there's a lot of interesting things with the lore of the zombies, and I know they kind of touch it on the Star Wars Galaxies game to kind of like give it a bit of a conclusion, but I wish there was like an actual novel to like conclude it, especially because I felt with Death Troopers that Han and Chewie's role is very strange in it, and I wish they had like another novel of them kind of coming to terms with it and like telling people about it, because I'm like, how are you not going to tell anybody about a ship full of zombies that you see? But more important to that, like as I was saying before, that I find the Sith very interesting and the Sith doctrine very interesting with like the Darth Bane and Darth Plagueis books. One novel that I feel like is not brought up enough when it comes to Sith lore is Red Harvest, and that goes into Darth Scabrus's his view of the Sith and his academy, and that obviously leads into the zombies and everything. But he's a very interesting character because his motivations very directly parallel Darth Plagueis's, where he's also trying to achieve immortality, and he wants to seek that as like a final goal, but his methodology is very different. Whereas like Plagueis is kind of like this stoic, like I guess like true scientist. Darth Scabrous is like the mad scientist version of Darth Plagueis. And I find that parallel like extremely interesting when I'm reading that book. And then it, of course, like leads into his creation of these zombies and everything. But there's a lot of really good Sith lore in that book, and his studies and his lab and his experimentations that I feel like isn't like brought up enough when it comes to Sith discussion.
Yeah. And so people who are getting into those horror kind of Star Wars books and stuff, here's a little callback and a little bit of like continuity, linkage between, like their Sith and what's going on in them and stuff. Because I know that these books sometimes don't get a very good rep because of the fact that it gets into like more of a horror sci-fi essence than anything else. And so for those who are listening right now and those who will listen later on, here's a little good positive spin on getting into those books, especially if you like horror and you like the Sith and Sith alchemy and stuff like that. There's a lot of continuity linkage between all of that. And so, all right, you guys, thank you so much for coming in and letting me interview and just basically learning your joy and your take and your adventure through the EU and what keeps you passionate as well with it, and
yeah, thanks for having me on.
Yeah. And, you guys can find him on Twitter. His link to his YouTube channel, which goes into gaming more than anything else, is shared as well. So you guys be sure to subscribe to him. Do you have anything coming up in the future within the week or so that you want to announce to the audience?
I don't have anything specifically planned yet. As far as my channel goes, I'm working on a review for the Cuphead DLC that recently came out, and I'm actually playing through all of the Dark Souls games right now. I'm gonna do like a big retrospective about all of those, all the way from Demon Souls through Elden Ring. So that's kind of one thing I'm working on with that.
Okay, awesome. And do you have anything to tell people who are getting into Star Wars or feel kind of disenfranchised where they feel like giving it up? Do you have any positive advice for them?
Yeah, I mean, get into the EU. That really turned my opinion back into a fan. I mean, I was really frustrated with the direction that Disney was taking things, and then I find something that interests you. Start with an era that interests you, whether it's the Thrawn trilogy or the Clone Wars era or post Endor. Just pick an era that you like. Start with something in there, and go from there. Because there's a bunch of different material in there. You're gonna like a lot of it. You might not like some of it, but there's definitely gonna be something in there that resonates with you that you're going to love a lot, and it's going to reinvigorate your interest.
All right, thank you so much again, and next Talking EU, I will announce. I have it coming up in a couple weeks at the end of the month here, so stay tuned for that, and that will be with Lance. I will share the information with you guys on Twitter and on my YouTube channel as well. And thank you guys again for coming in and listening, participating, and those who are catching the rewatch or watching later. Thank you guys for participating as well as the channel members. And as always, a pleasure for all of you guys being here, supporting our channels as well. And may the Force be with you, and catch you later.
I have fought the worst of all wars and witnessed the redemption of evil. I have seen balance restored to the Force. But order can turn to chaos, as it did when I was born. Now, with my loved ones and my loyal allies, I face a new challenge unlike any before. And I'm not sure if this time we can win.
Star Wars Vector Prime by R.A. Salvatore, the first novel of the new Jedi Order.
Another happy landing.